Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for Before the Storm Part 2, our second of 4 Gulf-wide StormSmart training exercises. Now, before we get too far into this, we've got a great session for you, but I do want to go through a few quick housekeeping. Those of you who joined us for the last session will be familiar with this. But because of the great turnout that we've been having, it's not possible for us to respond to everybody's questions as they come up throughout the presentation. So what we're going to do instead is use the built-in tools that you're probably familiar with that come with the program you're using right now to view the webinar. Over in the right-hand corner of your screen, you'll probably see a little window that looks something like what you can see up on the screen now. If you click on that there, you can type your questions in, and we will have a question answering session at the very end of the presentation. So if you type them in now, if you're having any sort of mechanical problems with connecting or whatever else, please put those in there, and we'll address those right away. Otherwise, we will get to those questions right at the end of the session. So once again, welcome to the StormSmart Coast training. This is our second of 4 sessions. My name is Wesley Shaw. I'm the lead developer for StormSmart Coast, and it's a great pleasure to have you here. With these 4 Gulf-wide coastal storms planning, response, and recovery training sessions, we're hoping that we'll give you some great information and allow you to really get going and helping to protect communities from storms, floods, sea level rise, and climate change, which is the goal of StormSmart Coast. We want to identify a couple things here, two main things. Number one, we want to give you information about existing, we want to give you information directly. So what's out there already, what can we tell you about it, and we'll directly convey that information. We also want to make sure that you have a good idea of what sort of tools are out there that we can't tell you about in great detail right now because perhaps they're really specific to your particular area and you're going to need to look at them community by community. Also, there's always new stuff coming out, and we want to make sure that we have you tap into all those the best sources of information that will continue to come out with more and more tools as we move forward. Our hope is that with this information, you'll be in a better position to help your community plan for and implement strategies to enhance resiliency, create more sustainable communities physically and financially, and of course reduce harm to people, property, and community resources. That's ever popular last one, and we will talk about funding during some of the sessions. One more quick thing before we jump right in. During some of the slides, you'll see a little green box that looks like what you can see up on the screen now. This is an indication that the activity that's being discussed is eligible for credit under the Community Rating System, or CRS. Those of you who aren't familiar with the CRS, it's part of the National Flood Insurance Program, which is administered by FEMA. The goal of the CRS is to provide incentives for communities to go above and beyond the minimum national requirements of the NFIP. If communities do that, they can gain points. These points can translate into insurance reductions for community-wide for everybody's flood insurance premium. It's a really neat program. Some of you may know that it's going through a major rewrite right now, and that's coming together and should be wrapping up, we're guessing, sort of the middle of the year. The points that you see up on the screen are how these activities would be scored under the old system, but we'll certainly update them on the StormSmart Coast site as those new points come out. So if you're not familiar with the CRS, there's a section on it on the StormSmart Coast state site. There's also detailed information on the changes coming to it at crs2012.org. See that URL there on the screen. This is an overview of the 4 different training sessions that are Gulf-wide. These are all brought to you by the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, or GOMA. It's a great organization that's doing a lot to help the Gulf Coast. You can see the first one we talked about sort of resources and identifying hazards, and today we're going to be talking about planning and regulation and standards. The next session, which is on March 22nd, is the third in the Before the Storm section, and we'll talk about mitigation infrastructure, training and outreach, and emergency services. And for those of you who have been on the StormSmart Coast site, you'll see that this is the general breakdown of the site as well. So if you'd like to go for more information, jumping right over to that site, you'll be able to find a lot of that. The final session that is Gulf-wide is on April 5th, and we'll talk about what to do during and immediately after a storm. So we'll talk about documenting damage and also about how to recover quickly and safely from these storm events. Following that, towards the end of April, we will have a presentation for each of the 5 Gulf states at a different time. We're following the questions as they come up on these webinars to figure out the exact topics that we'll cover during these sessions, but it will be specialized for each one of those states. So it'll be a chance to talk to experts from your state or that have expert knowledge about the conditions your state faces for each of the Gulf states. And with that, I would like to move on to introduce our speaker today, Allison Harden. Allison Harden is a certified floodplain manager with over 15 years of experience in urban and hazard mitigation planning, floodplain management, grant writing, and graphic information systems. After she got her BS in community and regional planning from Appalachia State, she began her career in 1991 as an emergency services regional planner and volunteer firefighter. After her short detour into the business world, she joined the City of Myrtle Beach Planning Department in 1999. She was promoted to the planning technician and then to GIS coordinator, and finally she served as the city's floodplain coordinator until she was promoted recently to become the city planner. Allison currently has the chairmanship of both the State GIS and Hazard Mitigation Associations and is also currently the co-chair of the Association of State Floodplain Managers Coastal Issues Subcommittee. And we're really happy that you're here today. And Allison, with that, I'd like to hand over the presentation to you.
Thank you, Wes. I'm going to wait for my little control window to come up. Thanks for letting me speak about planning. Yay, there it is. And we're going to go forward with the presentation, talk about the agenda. Today we're focusing on planning and regulations and standards. We'll cover all the subtopics listed on the slide. Planning and the smart growth ecosystem services, community master planning and such, regulations and standards based on land use and safer construction. Before the storm planning describes types of planning techniques and how they can reduce losses from hazard events. Planning is a powerful way for your community to protect its people and property by taking proactive steps like preventing development in flood-prone areas that ultimately safeguard your community and its financial resources. For example, well-planned development is less likely to necessitate costly evacuations or lead to damaged infrastructure. We'll review resources available to help you put together the plans and strategies listed on this slide for your community. First up is creating a community master plan. We're going to describe the benefits of developing a community master plan and offer examples of implementing this planning in different situations. A community master plan allows your community to recommend zoning strategies to guide private and public projects away from areas where they would likely put people and property at greater risk. Ideally, plans would reserve the most hazardous areas for parks, greenways, golf courses, agriculture, supportive navigation or wetlands banks, or similar open space. For example, your B&A zones on the flood insurance rate map, as well as areas at risk for storm surge or floodways, would be great opportunities for you to set aside that land. You've learned about before the storm in part one. You learned about B&A zones. We're going to mention them a little bit here and there throughout the rest of the presentation. So if you're not comfortable with the B&A zone definition, let us know and we'll make sure that we give a good definition for you for this section as well. The master plan can also specify priority areas for land acquisition, which will be discussed in more detail in the next training before Storm 3. A master plan can include activities to capitalize on non-structural ecosystem services to reduce losses during a storm. For example, coastal wetlands restoration to reduce coastal flooding and erosion. In your CRS note for the slide is that you get up to 31 CRS points. Activity 520, which is a planning activity, recognizes the importance of linking the floodplain management plan with other planning studies and with development, redevelopment, and population trends. So it's a good section, and it'll get you some extra points with CRS. Okay, there we are. Restoring ecosystem services. The image on this slide is a conceptual plan from the state of Louisiana for weakening the impact of storm surge. This concept includes the natural use of restored barrier islands as well as restored marsh area to gradually weaken the flow of water in a storm or flood. I believe this example is in a residential area. The characteristics of the coastline will impact the severity of the storm. Restoring the natural ecosystems located along the coast, like coastal wetlands or sand dunes, can greatly reduce the damages from a storm event. Coastal wetlands serve as a buffer and retention area for storm surge. serving as a natural hurricane protection system. Hurricanes become weaker as they travel over land. Therefore, the more land these storms have to cover before reaching a major city, like New Orleans or even further places inland, the better. Unfortunately, this also means that wetland and the coastal buffer zones take the brunt of the storm's force and can therefore degrade at a faster rate. Sustaining the natural buffer zones is one of the best management practices to help protect your coastline from coastal storms. The USGS estimates that 138,000 acres of land were lost to open water due to the 2005 hurricane season. Healthy wetlands are often compacted by the hurricanes, but naturally expand following the storm. Similarly, storms can actually benefit wetlands by bringing in sediment from the continental shelf. However, for wetlands that are in a degraded state already, hurricanes can be very damaging. All the habitats shown on this slide provide protection from the storm. To take advantage of these services, risk assessment needs to be comprehensive, needs to capture potential impacts to coastal, nearshore, and offshore marine ecosystems from both a market and non-market perspective. This requires a quantification of ecosystem service values and potential damages. Presently, the expected value of these natural resource damages is not included in the various economic analyses conducted by public agencies managing offshore oil and gas programs. Until this happens, society will continue to undervalue ecosystem services and take on an unacceptable level of risk in pursuit of energy resources. In risk assessment and planning, floodplain-specific information should also be considered. FEMA's Coastal Construction Manual offers excellent information on issues associated with development in floodplains, particularly sections 2.2 and 2.3, which provide an excellent overview of historic storm events and their often forgotten effects, as well as lessons learned that can inform future planning for development and redevelopment. Section 6.4.3 covers the legal requirements of compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, including what land uses are and are not allowed. Section 6.5 provides recommendations for exceeding NFIP minimum standards, which gets you more points in the CRS. The whole idea of the CRS program is that you're going above and beyond what the NFIP requires. Chapter 7 covers the importance of identifying hazards in the planning process, and Chapter 8 gives recommendations on how to develop undeveloped lands, as well as redevelopment for land. Figure 8.5, for instance, provides a simple do and don't list for land use in coastal areas. Another great resource is the Association of State Floodplain Managers handbooks. The NAI Toolkit for No Adverse Impact is particularly useful for local officials, and the Coastal NAI handbook is also very helpful. It gives coastal-specific examples of how no adverse impact can help your community. Similarly, for communities with historic properties, FEMA has published Integrating Historic Properties and Cultural Resource Considerations into Hazard Mitigation Planning. This guide discusses the flexibility that FEMA allows when planning the protection of historic properties and cultural resources. You can get a free copy by contacting the FEMA Publications Distribution Facility or by downloading it from the Internet. The phone number for the distribution facility is 800-480-2520. FEMA also publishes the Floodplain Management Bulletin on Historic Structures. This document explains how the National Flood Insurance Program defines historic structures and how historic structures are exempt from NFIP floodplain management requirements. This bulletin also provides guidance on mitigation measures that can be taken to minimize the impacts of flooding to historic structures. Coastal smart growth principles are a big buzzword in the planning world right now. You may want to consider integrating these concepts into your master plan. In particular, the transfer of development rights, or the TDR, is a regulatory strategy that harnesses private market forces to permanently protect open space. TDR does this by transferring the rights to develop from areas the community wishes to protect to other areas more suitable for development. Low-impact development, or LID, are techniques and practices that offer additional strategic advantages for inland floodplain management, such as on-site stormwater management that can reduce flooding. Whatever your planning approach, make certain that you're considering your community's specific hazard vulnerabilities as you make development decisions. For example, while high-density housing can reduce urban sprawl, it's not generally appropriate in the floodplain. Increasing building densities in floodplain can expose additional structures to flood damage and adversely affect the floodplain's natural ability to provide storm protection and flood control. For more information on smart growth, including LID, green neighborhoods, open space residential design, and other planning approaches, a good source is the Smart Growth website. The second subsection, Creating Plans and Strategies, describes how to undertake the mitigation measures listed on the slide and the details to benefit these measures. A multi-hazard mitigation plan identifies potential natural hazard threats, determines impacts, sets your mitigation goals, and implements strategies to lessen the impact of these hazards. You can check FEMA's official list to see if your community has an approved plan. The site is currently down as of today, but try again later, or you can contact your regional FEMA office. To be certain that your existing or new hazard mitigation plan meets FEMA standards, there's a guidebook called Local Multi-Hazard Mitigation Planning Guidance. This document includes specific information on how aspects of your multi-hazard mitigation plan can help qualify your community for the community rating system. If you want instructions on how to conduct a comprehensive risk review, Chapter 4 of FEMA's Understanding Your Risk, Identifying Hazards and Estimating Losses is helpful. If your community has the technical resources, FEMA and the National Institute of Building Sciences have developed a methodology called HAZUS to assess the community's hazard exposure. See the HAZUS website for more information. That's HAZUS. It's a really cool program that sits in with your GIS system. FEMA also has a document called Mitigation Planning Guidance, and it provides a step-by-step approach for creating a multi-hazard mitigation plan. Funding for creating a multi-hazard mitigation plan may also be available through various sources. My community has got a grant for our last update. That will be explained more in the last training during the storm and after the storm. Talk to a designated emergency manager for your community for the current status of your community's plan. You can take that opportunity to learn more about the goals of the plan and for opportunities to get more involved in the process. A second strategy, risk mitigation, is the community's plan for addressing potential risks. Effective mitigation strategies provide documentation of valuable local knowledge on the most effective and most efficient ways to reduce losses from hazard events. For example, a strategy may list specific actions to help preserve a beach that protects private or public property. Creating and implementing hazard mitigation strategies is one of the most effective ways to protect residents and property, and is nearly always more cost-effective than repairing the damage after a storm event. To learn how to create a risk mitigation strategy, see FEMA's useful Developing the Mitigation Plan Guide, especially Section 2, Identifying and Prioritizing Mitigation Actions. Risk mitigation strategies are likely to be site-specific. For technical assistance and state-specific contact information, you can go to the StormSmart Coast website. The last type of plan that we'll discuss today is a multi-objective master plan. Multi-objective management should address land use in addition to protecting economic, cultural, ecological, historical, fiscal, and aesthetic resources. This type of management gathers interested parties such as residents, business leaders, and local officials to decide how to manage land in the community, integrating as many interests as possible. The Association of State Floodplain Managers, again, offers a handbook using multi-objective management to reduce flood losses in your watershed. There's 6 recommendations shown on the slide for creating a multi-objective management plan. A little more detail on each. Keep efforts locally based. For a plan to be implemented with broad-based support, meaning you got as much support as possible across the spectrum of interest, it must be accessible to you, your neighbors, and others in the area. In other words, it'll integrate all the local concerns and goals. Work to understand the full range of coastal floodplain management issues, such as flooding, erosion, and sea level rise, through your hazard identification and mapping. In an effort to lessen the impact of these hazards, your community should recognize that storm surge, development, and other factors contribute to storm damage and flooding. And these factors are not taken into account by flood insurance rate maps. Think broadly when seeking your suggestions. Your community should not restrict itself to the structural solutions it might have relied on in the past. Other communities may also be able to offer innovative solutions or provide successfully implemented plans. As we learned in planning school, don't reinvent the wheel. Coordinate loss reduction measurements with other community needs, plans, and activities. When considering coastal flood and storm damage issues, identify other community concerns that may have similar or conflicting goals, like preservation of local economy, protection of recreational areas, and the maintenance of quality of life. Gather the people with those interests together to brainstorm your solutions. Make sure these meetings are well facilitated and end with some consensus, no matter how minor, to show that people's issues and ideas have been considered. Seek expert assistance when appropriate. While your community may have a unique combination of goals, it's likely that other communities have faced similar challenges. State and federal agencies like FEMA have expertise to offer. Take advantage of it. And build partnerships between private and public groups who may have a stake in decreasing the cost of your community's hazard response and storm damages. Local businesses and chambers of commerce, for example, may take great interest in flood mitigation efforts if they also protect the beaches that bring tourists to your community. FEMA 309 is a book called Addressing Your Community's Flood Problems, a guide for elected officials. It's a helpful overview, including case studies of how your community can work to comprehensively address their flood risk. It's a little white book. You might already have one in your office. Now, before the storm, we're going to talk about regulations and standards. We'll focus on opportunities for improving regulations and development standards to better protect people, property, and municipal resources. These improvements can benefit the entire community, including developers, residents, business owners, and local government. To address StormSmart regulations and standards, we'll review land use requirements and safer construction practices. A combination of tools like bylaws and ordinances, assorted regulations, development design, and performance standards are often used to implement community land use plans. This slide lists the land use requirements that we'll cover in this section. First, we'll focus on using strict zoning ordinances and regulations as a tool for community development. Next, we'll discuss how considering potential future conditions when siting new development and keeping new public infrastructure out of hazard-prone areas can help prevent future storm damage. We'll then talk about the National Flood Insurance Program's requirements. Your community is obligated to incorporate these requirements into local ordinances. We'll explain how your community can remain in good standing with the NFIP by incorporating them. Additionally, we'll talk about how you can ensure that local regulations allow appropriate development techniques and create permanent no-build areas. In short, deciding which land use requirements to use in your community and incorporating them is a very important step for mitigating future storm damage to infrastructure. One of the ways to mitigate future storm damage to infrastructure is to enlist strict zoning ordinances and regulations. Zoning regulations are one of the most powerful tools communities have to promote appropriate growth. Zoning bylaws and ordinances allow communities to reduce conflicts by clearly defining areas as appropriate or not appropriate for growth. To maximize their legal power, zoning regulations should clearly explain why your community wishes to discourage or prohibit growth in the coastal floodplain. There are a number of resources that provide additional information about zoning, such as the StormSmart Coast Fact Sheet Number 2, No Adverse Impact in the Legal Framework of Coastal Management. That one explains the legal issues surrounding regulating land use in coastal floodplains. StormSmart Coast Fact Sheet 3, A Cape Cod Community Prevents New Residences in Floodplains, discusses how a Massachusetts community has set an example with its own zoning bylaw, which prohibits construction of residences in certain areas known to flood. There's also two FEMA publications providing zoning information, Fact Sheets 6 and 7 from FEMA's Home Builder's Guide to Coastal Construction series. This is a great series. It's really easy to understand. They explain how planning, siting, and design decisions affect coastal home costs and provide guidance site selection. Additionally, the Cape Cod Commission and Sea Grant has released a model bylaw for effectively managing coastal floodplain development. It recommends that communities prohibit all new or expanded non-water dependent structures in the coastal high hazard zone. It's also important to consider the potential future conditions of your coastal community when defining strict zoning ordinances and siting regulations. As longtime year-round coastal residents can attest, coastal landscapes are forever changing, and many places that seemed safe for building 10 years ago are now regularly underwater, even during minor storms. Many sources now predict that the frequency and power of storms will increase in the future. When using coastal flood data, especially flood insurance rate maps, be sure to consider future flooding scenarios. Your community may also wish to include accommodations for future coastline changes and the effects of sea level rise. Accommodations may include prohibiting the construction of new buildings in areas where there's likely to be threatened by erosion during their design line. An example of bylaw incorporating projected sea level rise is the Model Floodplain District bylaw from Massachusetts. Another detailed study on how local governments can best adapt to and respond to climate change is a document from the University of Washington, Preparing for Climate Change, a guidebook for local, regional, and state governments. There are specific resources for Florida, Mississippi, and Texas that can be found on the StormSmart Coast website. A community that is aware of the potential impacts of future storms can prevent important infrastructure from being built in hazard-prone areas. In order to safeguard essential public infrastructure, such as utilities, roads, fire stations, and police stations, it's essential to develop your zoning regulations to keep this infrastructure out of vulnerable areas and areas that may be difficult to reach during a storm. Planning ahead is key to mitigating storm damage, so you should think about your community's future infrastructure needs, particularly in areas where there may be new development, and write your zoning regulations accordingly. Cape Cod Commission's model bylaw is a great example of a regulation that discourages infrastructure in the floodplain. This bylaw is available on StormSmart Coast's Massachusetts state page. The zoning bylaw allows roads and driveways only if they are of minimal legal and practical width, where there is no alternative means of access as there's established development. In addition to the regulations mentioned previously, your community is required to follow various rules as a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP. Some of those requirements that you are required to follow are requiring permits for all development in the V and the A zones as mapped on your community's flood insurance rate map, which was described in the first training before the storm, Part 1. The program defines development as any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation or drilling operations, or storage of equipment or materials. Y'all, that's pretty much everything. Adding NFIP requirements to your local bylaws, ordinances, and associated regulations can help increase compliance, ensure your community remains in good standing under the NFIP, and it decreases unnecessary confusion among permit applicants, as well as boards and departments. In addition, you tie it into the CRS, you get more points in the CRS program, your community receives reduced insurance costs, and it comes back to your community in savings. Though it's important to write the regulations that consider proper zoning, potential future conditions, and the siting of important infrastructure, it's also critical to ensure that local regulations allow for appropriate development techniques so your community can continue to grow. Well-meaning but outdated local regulations often encourage land use practices inappropriate for coastal floodplains. For example, sometimes regulations require curb and wide paved roads, but those may increase flooding and erosion in the coastal floodplain. There are some resources listed on this slide which provide information on how communities can allow development while reducing pressure on municipal services infrastructure, and budget. The practices that your community adopts should be compatible with floodplain development and shouldn't, for example, create higher housing density in areas prone to flooding. FEMA's Coastal Construction Manual offers excellent background on the challenges of development in floodplains, as well as specific recommended practices. Check to see if your community allows or encourages them. The Association of State Floodplain Managers Coastal NAI Handbook has specific regulatory recommendations. The National Association of Realtors has collected a number of resources on transfer development rights, or TDR. Their document, called the ABCs of TDR, harnesses private market forces to permanently protect open space by transferring the development from the areas that you want to protect to the other areas more suitable for development. And finally, the Resilient Coast Policy Frameworks for Adapting the Built Environment to Climate Change and Growth in Coastal Areas of the U.S. Gulf of Mexico is a publication examining existing legal and policy frameworks that might hinder or facilitate that adaptation to changes brought about by global climate change and population growth in coastal communities along the U.S. Gulf Coast. Your community may benefit from these resources when considering appropriate development techniques, incorporating proper floodplain regulations, considering the regulatory impact on your community's economic growth, and creating permanent no-build areas are all important tools for your community to utilize when planning and development. Permanent protection is especially appropriate for areas where flooding is so frequent or severe that any development would put people or property at extreme risk. Your community may wish to set aside these high-risk areas as parks or recreational spaces. The resources listed on this slide contain suggestions for coastal communities looking to create no-build areas. Establishing setback lines for new construction can keep structures away from shorelines and hazard-prone areas, such as those with high erosion rates. NOAA's Construction Setbacks webpage provides an overview of setbacks. The rolling easement approach is an innovative regulatory framework modeled after an existing Texas law that allows people to use the land as they will, but prohibits them from stopping the natural advance of the ocean. For many more resources, you can check out NOAA's great new Adaptation Policy and Legislation page. Two examples include the Florida Coastal Construction Control Line Program, which is an essential element of Florida's coastal management program, providing protection for Florida's beaches and dunes while assuring reasonable use of private property. Maine has adopted a series of regulations that strictly limit new construction and reconstruction in coastal dunes, including the prohibition of structures likely to be damaged by erosion within a 100-year period of time. See Maine's coastal sand dune rules for more information. The fourth training in this series on April 5th provides more information on funding designated no-build areas. In the next subsection, we'll discuss the construction practices and techniques that can be applied when building or siting new structures. These techniques can be beneficial in the long run to coastal communities. The first slide will focus on using freeboard to elevate structures above predicted floodwaters. In my community, we have a 3-foot freeboard. Freeboard is elevating a building's lowest floor above predicted flood elevations by additional height of 1 to 3 feet. There are communities that go beyond the 3 foot. Elevating a home a few feet above legally mandated heights has very little effect on the overall look of the home, yet it can lead to substantial reductions in flood insurance. Stormwaters can and do rise higher than shown on flood insurance rate maps. Freeboard helps protect buildings from storms larger than those the flood insurance rate maps are based on, and provides an added margin of safety to address the flood modeling and mapping uncertainties associated with flood insurance rate maps. Freeboard also affords better preparation for ongoing sea level rise. Since elevations on flood insurance rate maps do not include sea level rise, Freeboard will keep structures above floodwaters as storm surge elevations increase. As shown on the image on this slide, elevating a home can greatly reduce flood insurance premiums. Recognizing that Freeboard reduces flood risk, FEMA provides substantial reductions in flood insurance premiums for structures incorporating freeboard, sometimes more than 50%. In addition, for every foot of freeboard you incorporate into your local ordinance. The CRS credits you 100 points each. Considering that 500 points is the difference and another 5% of discounts for your community's insurance rate, that 300 points goes a long way. The expense of incorporating freeboard into new structures is surprisingly low, generally adding only about 0.25 to 1.5% of the total construction cost for each additional foot of added height. This was documented in a 2006 FEMA Commission study. The minor resulting increase in monthly mortgage payments is generally more than offset by savings on NFIP premiums. Therefore, adding freeboard typically saves homeowners money. Your V zones are designations on the flood insurance rate maps that refer to coastal areas subject to the highest levels of wave energy and flooding. Those are the orange ones on your screen. The A zones are also flood insurance rate map designation that are subject to flooding, but with less wave energy than V zones, wave heights less than 3 feet. Those are highlighted with blue on your screen. Consider, for example, a proposed one-story building in a V zone, that's the oceanfront zone, that would cost $250,000 to build as a minimum legal standard. Adding 1 foot of freeboard to the proposed building would add about 0.4% to total construction costs, or $1,000 per foot. If the owner takes out a mortgage at 6.5% APR for the total construction cost, he or she will have lower monthly payments, mortgage plus NFIP premiums, with a 3 foot of freeboard, even though the construction costs are higher. In the home example, adding 3 foot of freeboard saves the homeowner about $270 per month, or $95,600 over the life of a 30-year mortgage. Benefits in A zones are generally less dramatic, but still substantial. Licensed insurance agents can help you determine NFIP premiums for specific properties. Nearly everyone building in floodplains can better protect themselves and their property and save on flood insurance by including freeboard into their construction and reconstruction projects. For homeowners, having an elevated house increases the chances that it will weather storms safely, decreasing worry and protecting your investment. Freeboard also provides a competitive edge to builders and contractors, allowing them to market the benefits of reduced flood insurance and flood risk to potential owners. When constructing new municipal buildings, such as schools or fire stations, freeboard can mean savings of tax dollars. More than 25% of businesses that close due to storm damage never reopen, according to the Institute for Business and Home Safety. In this case especially, freeboard helps businesses by protecting important records, inventory, and the building itself from flooding. There are a number of resources that offer more information on freeboard and how to incorporate it into your community's buildings. For technical information on the cost of incorporating different flood-resistant building techniques, including freeboard, you can see the American Institute for Research's 2006 study, Evaluation of the National Flood Insurance Program Building Standards. For general information on the NFIB, you can see www.floodsmart.gov. And for businesses looking to prepare for storms and other catastrophic events, you can visit the Institute for Business and Home Safety's website. While freeboard is a great way to protect property from coastal storms and save on flood insurance, homes without properly designed and constructed foundations are likely to be damaged or cause damage in storms as well. Your community may wish to consider adopting regulations that require a design professional, an architect or an engineer, to certify that new building foundations are built to code. Alternatively, your community could require property owners to submit a certification by a design professional that the completed project is compliant with all local codes. You can download an elevation certificate from FEMA's website. In order to effectively protect people and property, the state building code must be enforced. Permits often stipulate that buildings in the coastal floodplain be elevated on open foundations. Unfortunately, owners of these buildings often later enclose lower areas of their structures for parking, storage, or even livable space. In addition to putting the structure itself and the people in it at greater risk, illegally enclosed areas increase risk to others by creating debris during storms and increasing erosion to property. To effectively enforce building codes, the community should consider conducting routine inspections of elevated structures to ensure that no illegal enclosures have been constructed. While the state building code is designed to help protect people and property, your community may wish to go beyond its basic levels and adopt stricter building codes, such as those of the International Code Council. Doing so may advance your community an entire class in the community rating system. In addition, my community gets 50 points of credit on the CRS for requiring that every residence that's built with elevated due to being in the floodplain has a no conversion clause attached to their deed. It's a sign-off that carries with them and the future property owners that say that they pledge they will not enclose the area below the BFE, and then we go through and inspect them. It's an easy extra 50 points to do when you already don't allow the area below the BFE to be enclosed because it violates the NFIP. As your community's understanding of local flood and erosion risks improves, so does your chance of successfully addressing your risks. Detailed information on areas prone to storm damage will allow better planning for development and emergencies and public education. In the short term, be sure to identify preventative activities and actions that can be taken. To compile a list of financial resources that your community is eligible for, see the StormSmart Coast website or attend the state-specific training course the week of April 23, 2012. You can also organize community management and elected official support. In the medium term, check to see if these efforts are effective and make adjustments as needed. That wraps up our presentation for today. In 2 weeks, we'll cover part 3, before the storm. That training will cover mitigation, infrastructure, training and outreach, and emergency services. In the meantime, you can learn more at stormsmartcoast.org, or you can get connected to your peers at StormSmart Connect. The URL is on the slide. I'm going to turn it over to Wes, because we're going to be opening up the questions and answer period. If you have typed in questions, we'll probably start with those, but I'm going to defer to Wes.
Hey, Allison, this is...
Go ahead, John.
Sure, I just wanted to jump in with a quick question here, Wes, actually for you. Could you recap how folks can get the CFM continuing education credits?
Yeah, you bet. So actually, I'll show you something. I'm going to jump over here to the StormSmart Coast Next site. So let me just go to the home page here. If you type in stormsmart.org, you'll end up on a page that looks like this. You can see the tab. The second one from the right is StormSmart Training. You click on that. You'll end up on a page that looks like this, which has the description. It also has, you can see the big orange register now button for today's, and then the following webinars here as well. So it's an easy place to find out what we're going to be talking about in the next few trainings. But there's also a place where you can access everything else that we're handing you as a participant. So you click on this little button here on the right, you end up on the storm training page. And this is a group that we have on StormSmart. I won't go into too much detail on this because I know a lot of you are on the first session and are familiar with how StormSmart works. But it's a professional networking site. You create a profile and you can go in and join these groups. And an advantage of being part of this group is you can participate in what happens in it, including you can post news as you want to in this box here. You also can access the documents which we will upload. For example, right now, pulling up the page that will show the documents that we uploaded for the last one. So what we've got there right now is the presentation that we gave in a PDF format that you can easily download, and we'll put today's webinar up there by early tomorrow. So we'll take what Allison has just kindly presented, and we'll add all the URLs and make it all clickable so you can easily access all the resources on there. Also here, up in the description up here, you can see this link right here, and it says this is the link for the continuing education credit. If you click on that, you'll find an easy form which will allow you to, all you have to do in and hit submit, and we will take it from there. So you won't get a confirmation or anything, but what we will do is take all the names of everybody who submitted. We'll check it against, of course, the list of people who we know are on the call, and then we'll send that list on to the Association of State Floodplain Managers, and they will credit your account with one continuing education credit. So there won't be any confirmations along the way. If you do have any questions, of course, feel free to contact us. But once you hit that form, it will say it's been submitted, and at that point, you're all set. So with that, if people have questions about that or anything else, we'd like to open up the floor. Charles, did we get some questions coming in for Allison?
We've got plenty of questions for you and Allison, so hopefully you can each jump in as appropriate. And one of them has to do with the community rating system and those little green boxes that showed the points. One of the attendees, mentioned that there are proposed changes coming up here in 2012. And I can't imagine that the points that we had on the slides were updated, but I don't know if you know anything or if either of you can speak to those CRS updates that are going to be upcoming.
You bet. I'll take a first stab at it, and Allison, if you want to jump in after that, that's great. But yeah, so the CRS is going through a major revision right now, the biggest one in its 20-year history, and a bunch of updates are coming, and it will switch how certain activities are scored and also which activities, sort of the specific details of how those activities work. I'm going to strongly recommend this site called crs2012.org, which has all the information that you could possibly want on the transition that's going on, including over here on the right, you can see there's a spot where you can download the summary of all the changes that are happening. Now, the reason that the points that we show right now are based on the old system is that the new system isn't through the whole entire process. It's not official yet, so we don't want to update the points until we actually know exactly what's going to be happening, but we certainly will be doing that as the points come out later.
And I can also add that my community is a Class 5 community, and we're currently going through the 2012 manual to see where we're going to be affected in points, where we can gain new points that we didn't have before, where we're going to lose some points. So we haven't finished that process yet, but we are in the process of looking at that right now.
Great. Thanks to you both, Wes and Allison. Allison, I think this next question is for you, and I'm going to read it word for word so that I don't mess it up. But how do you do the no conversion clause that you have attached to your deeds? We tried to use the FEMA form, and our clerk of court would not accept it. Does that question make sense to you?
It does. We used the standard language that was approved under the CRS program, and we created a document that in our environment, we don't issue the CO until that document has been recorded. Now, our Register of Deeds might have a different idea of what their Register of Deeds would record, but it is, for us, it's simply a document that goes along with the deed. So maybe that's the way to approach it.
Okay, thanks. Another question, you talked a lot, especially at the beginning, about, the community master plans and the different elements that go into that. Could you talk a little bit, if a community is starting from scratch, like what the timeline looks like for putting together a plan and what kind of public participation is important to have with those?
Sure. If a community is starting a plan from scratch, my first thing I say is don't. Go out there and get some help. Go to someone else. Dude, don't reinvent the wheel. The first thing I learned in planning class, Planning 101, don't reinvent the wheel. Go out there and research some of the communities that have what you want going on in their environment. Then go collect their plans, pull from what they're doing, what you like, something that you can pass in your environment. It does take a while, depending upon what level of detail you're going into for your community master planning. Our comprehensive planning process takes about 18 months to 2 years when you go from the beginning to end of the review cycle, when we rewrite our master plan every 10 years. And the data collection period is probably 3 months to 6 months, depending upon what we're focusing on. As much as we get as much public input as possible, each one of our sections of a plan has a committee, and each one of our planning commissioners is assigned to a committee, and we have staff members that are assigned to each committee, and they hold their meetings. We get together every few months to make sure that we're still on track, and then the staff's responsible for helping put the document together to make sure that where there are overlap between the different communities, that we can eliminate any duplication of efforts, put priority on those objects that meet multiple goals, and then it goes forward to public hearing as a whole document. We get the public hearing process going, and then it goes to our city council for review and approval.
Great, thanks, Allison. That's very helpful context for that. Also, towards the beginning of your presentation, you talked a little bit about ecosystem services and low impact development, and it seems like for the longest time that hard infrastructure was king. Do you feel like these using these kinds of natural systems is becoming more mainstream?
Yeah, I do. I know that it's a lot more mainstream with the planners than it is with the developers, though, and we're working on that. We have a couple of examples of low-impact development that the city has implemented on their property as examples to the development community, saying this is how this works. For instance, we have a dry retention pond and a rain garden on a historic train depot site, and when the water filters into that dry retention pond, it's clear. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I've never seen a pond in Myrtle Beach that's clear, but this one is. We also have done things like pervious paving on our beachfront park areas so that we have areas where it's not totally impervious, where the water's not running straight off, but it actually filters through the special pavement tiles. We've done some different landscaping environments on some of our recreation facilities, and we use that as a kind of like a learning lab thing. See, this is what it looks like when it's implemented. In addition, we're working through a zoning rewrite right now where we give, it's more form-based, where we give special credit to a developer for using low-impact designs for stormwater and for green building principles and things that will end up being a benefit to them in either a height bonus or a density bonus on the site. We're not in floodplain areas, obviously, but outside of the floodplain areas. We're considering the transfer of development rights, which is the kind of thing that allowed Penn Station to be preserved. That's the big legal case that set up the legality of transfer of development rights. But so far, we haven't got a lot of elected support behind that principle yet. Still working on it, though. I'm not going to give up on it.
Thanks. That's really interesting to hear the difference between how folks, how planners think, and developers, and those different challenges it seems like you've been dealing with.
The developers tend to say that they need the land for the development. Our job is to show them that they can do both, that they can have the density that they want as long as they're using these low-impact designs, that we will allow for certain other things to happen on the site that we might not. You might get reduced parking requirements if you use a pervious pavement for a section of the parking, or if you leave some of it as grasscrete, so that the grass and the water goes through the ground area, but still serves as a parking area. So we're trying to get creative with that. With the water table being so high in our area, it just gets more and more expensive to dig ponds, and ponds are just not the way we want to go.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Another question that we've got here relates to freeboard, and when you're talking to folks, about that, what are the challenges that you come up with? I mean, is it only for new construction, or you went through some of the financial details? Is it really that easy?
I'd like to say yes, but nothing's ever that easy. It's for us. It was an easy decision to make from a staff standpoint. It was easy for us to say, let's add 3 feet to it. When we got to the development community said, no thanks. You're going to be essentially penalizing me because I have a 35-foot height restriction in this residential neighborhood, for instance, and you're going to make me go up an extra 3 feet. So what we did in our ordinance was we relaxed the height restriction equal to the amount of freeboard in the residential areas where you have to elevate due to BFE, and then we give that 3 extra feet. We'll give them that 3 extra feet back at the peak. So in the residential neighborhood, the height limit is 35 feet unless you're in the floodplain, which is essentially 38. That was one of the ways that we sold that idea. As far as the commercial zones, again, with the elevation, I don't remember a time where we added 3 extra feet, because I don't remember a building in the last 15 years that went all the way up to the limits of what we have as a height limit. Their complaint was more, what am I going to do with that space underneath? And we really converted some of them into making sure that the parking is on the ground level, that the parking goes underneath the building. When the parking goes underneath the building, and you leave it as open space and parking, then they get more of the lot to build their building. So it's interesting that way.
Great, thanks a lot. It's good to hear your experience with that. The last question, and Wes, this might come back to you, and then I don't know if you also want to take a minute to wrap things up. Has to do with the continuing education credits. Will people get like a receipt that they somehow know that that they've got those credits?
Sure, I'll take that one. Obviously, it does not. No, the short answer is no, they won't. But they're welcome to check with the ASFPM if they want, or if people are concerned, they can email us. But it's a really simple process. So it's one less email for you to keep track of. But again, if you go, I'll show you once again how to do that. So you'll go to the StormSmart training tab here, and the StormSmart training group. It's linked right here. If you click on that, I'll just fill out the form. Once it gives you once it feeds your answer, you are set, you're fine. And like I said, feel free to contact me if you have any questions about that at all. But you'll be golden, you'll be in. And Charles, is that the last of our questions? Looks like we're about out of time.
Yep, that's the last question.
Perfect. So I did want to take just a quick moment and thank Allison Harden for giving her time and helping us out with her vast amount of experience and presenting this information today. It was really, really useful. I also want to thank everybody for attending today. We got a good turnout again, and we're thrilled that you're here. I would encourage you to, if you'd like this presentation, to register for the next one, which you can also do back on that StormSmart training tab. Also, quick heads up, tomorrow you will get an email with a very, very brief, a link to a very brief survey. And if you would take that and let us know what you thought of the webinar, we look forward to adjusting them to make them meet your needs as best as possible. So once again, thanks everybody for attending. Thank you, Allison, and thanks everybody else. And hopefully we'll see you all back online in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Wes.